hello, hi, welcome in everybody. Hi, Fake Crate, hi, Praxaquat. Hi, guys. Hi. Um, I am happy to see you. I, I'm Kuari Koi, and I'm an anglerfish, and today I'm gonna be a nerd at you. so, so, I owe a little bit of an apology because I bleh. Hey Eric, thank you. I was originally going to do this PowerPoint on another topic, something somebody recommended in the Discord, and I swear I am like 60% done with that PowerPoint. It's just a little of like fact checking, double checking things, and like flares and stuff. But ADHD is a son of a bitch. and no matter how hard I tried, the hyperfixation is strong in this one. So I started hyperfixating on one of my beloved topics of Nintendo nonsense, and because of that, I maybe did a whole PowerPoint in a day. My high school teachers would be screaming. So, you guys are gonna learn about a fish fixation topic today. You're gonna learn some eldritch fish gaming lore. Because I do retro games, right? And I don't just do retro games because they're cool. I used to manage a retro video game store, come a man, and it was cool and it was neat. And the things I've seen are super rad, and I want to teach you guys about some of them because they're super rad. So that's what I'm gonna do today. I'm going to teach you about something I have seen once, and yes. Hey, Silverbuster, you're headed to bed because you're sick as a dog. Oh no, I hope you feel better. Oh, dude, get rest. Feel better. It's required of you. Thank you. I will do my best to have fun with the presentation. I have a little bit of soju left to help me along the way. But you know, other than that, this PowerPoint is brought to you by my my fascination with the way that, like, up until about, I'd say 6th gen consoles, things were somewhere between like alchemy and the Wild West when it came to video game console developers. And we're gonna go over a little bit of that today, one piece in particular, and I'm gonna teach you some things on the way, and hopefully you'll enjoy it, and hopefully you'll learn things, and hopefully you'll find this cool, and yeah, all that good stuff. If I'm talking a little loud today, I'm sorry. Work was so loud, work was so loud today that I could feel the noise resonating in my sinus cavities. I didn't know that was a thing that could happen, but it does. And so if I'm talking a little loud, gomena sorry. I don't mean to. I'm just a little broken guy today, and that's all I can be. Hey, cute Dragon MB, thanks for hanging out. You like my glasses? I like to put them on when I'm about to learn you guys some stuff. It makes me feel better about it. So yeah, give me just a second. I'm gonna get things set up on my end so that way I can see all your cool and pretty faces and all that jazz. We're gonna get things started. Now this PowerPoint doesn't have music, so I was going to just play some music in the background if you needed it. But if you decide you don't need it, let me know and I'll turn it off, okay? Okay. Let's jump over. Yeah, okay. Hi, can you hear the musics? Can you hear stuff and things? Can you hear thing? Hi, yes, hi. So, do you guys want to take a guess as to what today's PowerPoint might be? You're welcome. You're absolutely welcome to make any wild assumptions or guesses or hopes or dreams or bribes. You're more than welcome, really. You just gotta let me know if what you thinking. Oh, what's going on here? Hold on. Hold on. I need to fix a thing because it's not pulling the right thing. Hold on. Why are you there? Why are you there? Why are you there? Doko? Doko? No, where did you go? There did you go? Okay. Here we go. There we go. My things are going weird on my computer. I think it's starting to gain sapience. And it has opinions at me. So today I'm gonna learn you some important information. Get ready. You ready? We're gonna talk about the Nintendo Satellaview. I wonder how many of you have heard of the Satellaview. If you haven't, that's the normal reaction, and that's okay. You're gonna get so much cool information today. Just you wait. Just you wait. So you may be asking yourself, or me, Kawari, is that a whole console? Well, no, sort of. You're not among the knowers, Praxiquat? I am so excited to teach you. This is going to be great. So, Nintendo made a lot of really awesome add-ons for their consoles in the Japanese domestic market that never saw the light of day overseas. Like the Power Glove got its own release, and that's going to get its own PowerPoint at some point because the story behind the Power Glove is fascinating. But that's not today. There were a number of things Nintendo did globally. There were a number of pieces Nintendo released internationally. There were just some things that stayed in Japan to be special. The Satellaview is one of them. So if you didn't know, the Nintendo console, the NES and the SNES have different names in Japan. They are the Famicom instead of NES, and the Super Famicom or Super Famicom for the Super Nintendo. Famicom is I want to say conjunction word, and there's a better term for it, but I can't brain that word right now. But it's a compound of abbreviations for family and computer. That's why it's the Famicom. And it was the family computer gaming system. So the Japanese iteration had a disk drive attachment that was only in Japan. Not only did it add hi-fi sound, but it had downloadable games. In the 80s. In the 80s. Key Dragon Envy, how do you indicate where something is with a Power Glove? What do you mean? Do you mean like on the screen? Because it depends on the game if that's the case. Or are you making a joke that I just don't know because I live in a cave? Oh, you PowerPoint. Oh. Congratulations. Good joke. Good job. My dad joke heart is pleased. Thank you. A lot of games released on the NES in the US had their start on the Famicom Disk System. Yes, they did, Fake Crade, so you know this system at least a little bit, right? You know the Famicom Disk System? Okay, cool. So, again, I need to reiterate, we are talking like 1988, okay? You could go to a department store in Japan and download a game and bring it home and play it. Nintendo also had a modem in Japan, and it almost had a modem in the USA. Again, the NES came out roughly 1985. We're just going to go with 1985 because I'm not going to get nitpicky on you. But this system had a modem in Japan. A modem! How many of your families had internet in the 80s? How many of your families had cable, like reliable cable service in like 85? I've heard stories all the time about how we had just 3 TV channels up until like, I don't know, mid 90s or so. And Japan, they had a modem for the NES. The Super Famicom actually almost got a disk drive. I don't know if you know about that, but it was a whole entire disk drive that was built and had prototyped for the Super Nintendo. It's a whole thing. It's a wild story. It's a whole thing. Instead of getting the disk drive, though, the Super Famicom got the Satellaview. It is entirely wild for 88. Hey, Craig, you might be thinking about the 64 disk drive, which had 9 prototype games, including Ura Zelda. But here we have the Famicom. This right here, this red bit, this red and white bit up here with the controllers on either side, that is the Japanese NES. This red brick it's sitting on, that's nearly twice the size of the console by volume and mass, that's the disk drive. So let me back up a little bit here and start back at the beginning of Nintendo's signature weird-ass peripherals. So this released in 1986. You could, like I said before, you could go to a department store, certain convenience stores in Japan, all over Japan, and you'd just bring the little Nintendo branded disc with you, and you'd plug it into the console, the console tower, basically in the kiosk in the mall, in the department store, and you could download specific games that you wanted just straight onto that floppy disk and bring it home, and it only cost you about $5. Oh yeah, the NES cords are super short. You were sitting close to that TV, boyo. Famicom controllers were hardwired in and you couldn't remove them. Exactly. So you could mail Nintendo one of their Nintendo branded floppy disks because it had to be a specific size and like model make, but you know, proprietary hardware, right? It's what Nintendo do. It's what they always do. But you could send a disc by mail, or you could go to the nearest department store and plug in your disc and pay them Happy Machine $5 and get a whole new system or a whole new game for your system and just bring it home. And this is when games were still like, you know, $20 to $30, still a little more reasonable than modern games. Don't get me started. But you could keep that disc, you could get another disc and then put another game on it. You could rewrite the game if you decided you didn't like it. I don't have words how cool that is, you know? And if you know the TV sound company, entertainment electronics company Sharp, they had built a twin system that had both the disc and the cartridge ports built in. Just inherently built in. Because Nintendo used to be all about technological innovation and partnering with other technologically innovative brands to do weird shit. That was kind of Nintendo's thing in the 80s. That was part of why Nintendo adopted a devoted audience of super nerds up until about 1994. So because we have a lot of cool things to go over here real quick, I wanted to bring up one particular bonus bit of nonsense for you. This is called the Famicom Titler. I know. I also want to call it the Famicom Titler. Gomena sorry. It's not how it is. But if you look on the left, that's the console. And on the right, that's the booting screen for this console. It's adorable. And it says Famicom Titler. It is super cute, right? It's adorable. You look at that system, it kind of reminds you of like one of those old 80s mobile phone, like car phone type of things. Like it looks huge and bulky, right? Right? You have any idea what this bulky boy could do? He could work miracles. Absolute miracles. So, 1989, the same year as, what was it, Disney's Little Mermaid, I think, if I remember correctly. Sharp decided that their twin system wasn't cool enough and they needed to gaze deep into the future. So they made this bad boy, the Titler. It is the only consumer level Famicom to internally generate RGB video instead of making it a transition system between processes. and the only one to feature S-video output. So it was arcade level graphics at home on this console. It looks like a fax machine. It does, right? Like you expect to see a phone there. I see it out of the corner of my eye. I expect there to be a phone plugged into the side, like the old fax phone machines. I swear to God. And it's not a phone. It's just a controller plugged into the side. But this thing could give you arcade quality video at home. It could also generate subtitles, you know, and capture game footage. 1989, released to the Japanese domestic market. It was a Let's Play machine. This is what people could use in their home. This and a simple RF video camera, which, let's be real, it was the 80s. Practically everybody wanted to own a video camera. Congratulations, you have the internet's earliest Let's Plays of old NES titles, old 8-bit games. You ever want to figure out how to beat hole 12 in golf on the NES? Well, you could, for thanks to this guy. Somebody might have sent you a video, might have posted it somewhere. You could now know. You could know from across the country, but only across the country, because this was a Japan exclusive. Again, 1989. This thing has a keyboard up here. It has a touchpad, this little square right here. You use this stylus on this touchpad right here. And you have a microphone built into the system. So you could make commentary on your Let's Play videos. Praxiquat, beginning of documentable speedrunning? Yes, actually, it's one of the beginnings. And it's all Nintendo's fault at its core. Nintendo was basically Doc Brown in it over here going, I made this thing, I can make it better. So again, this picture, by the way, of the titler, because they're hard as hell to find pictures of, like, just natively. I actually went searching on eBay. This is an eBay listing for a titler. They still have the box, which is behind it. It's incredible. It's incredible. Look at how well preserved that touchpad is. This is insanity. Some Nintendo wizard magic, I tell you what. So, let's talk about what the Famicom Disk System did to Nintendo and did to gaming in general, because it did a lot. There were over 100 games that were released just for the Disk System. Oh, how much was that eBay listing? It was about $350, and I considered it. I asked myself how much I could live off of cheap noodle, and the answer was not that much. Besides, I love my little NES. He's a little good boy, and he's got an extra hat that's all shiny. It's adorable. I changed out his pins myself to make sure he had healthy teeth. But the disk system. You had over 100 games released for this console that were, you know, either downloadable, like the downloadable kinds and whatever. Some of them were exclusive to the point where we know they existed by, like, references in Nintendo Powers and newspapers and magazines, and maybe the occasional person has an odd floppy disk they never rewrote because they only released at the kiosk. And if you decided that you liked that game, it was fine, but you wanted something else for right now, you'll come back, you'll get it, and you never did. Oops, there goes the game. It's like Doctor Who. It's like Doctor Who First 3 Doctors, where you're looking for this found footage, this lost media, or early MST3K, right? Where you've got entire communities of people just hunting and searching for this lost videotape or this lost floppy disk, or, you know, whatever they can get their hands on, because there's gaps in our history. There's incredible amounts of early Nintendo lost media generating machine. It's like its own SCP. So, while you did have a lot of these while you did have a lot of these kiosk exclusive games, like they weren't released on you know, first round Nintendo cartridges, they did get later released on Nintendo cartridges. that's a whole thing where we would need to talk about the 3 screw versus the 5 screw and the processor chip in your early Nintendo cartridges. We should do that at some point. Remind me to do that at some point, because that in itself is an excellent amount of history as far as video game development. Um, so this disk system added a little more RAM, added a little more processing power to the original Famicom. So it was only through the release of this system that they had the space to actually make some of the best games for the console. Basically they added a second computer underneath the first one and were like, oh, we have all these things we can do now. And so like later Nintendo consoles had that integration of more RAM, more processing power, more memory. Just like everything was a little bit more tightly packed and a little bit more figured out in later generations of the Famicom. And in the NES for that matter, because it was a significantly later release. But experimentation, trial and error. You figure things out on the fly. Sometimes you have to build the airplane in the air, and it's unfortunate, but at least it's only a biplane and not a supersonic jet, right? So another thing about those super cool Nintendo kiosks was that if you say had a game that had a competitive points attribute to it, you could bring it back to the kiosk. You could upload your data. You could upload your score for like original Donkey Kong, the ladder and scaffold Donkey Kong, or the arcade style Mario, or things like that. You could upload your score, and the kiosks, because they were all connected to the Nintendo Central Source, would share high score panels. So this was basically the first online leaderboard in like home console gaming. And it was a bright yellow Nintendo kiosk that you'd find in like the equivalent of a Macy's. I find that, I personally find that hella cool. I think that's way radtastic. I don't know about you, but like I'm the type of person, who enjoys finding out like the originations of certain things, and this is absolutely so easy to track. It's wonderful. So not everything did get ported, like I talked about, from the original Famicom disk system to later Famicom cartridges and later the NES, but there were almost 200 games that released to the public through the kiosks. When you say they were connected to the Nintendo Source, what do I mean? It was an internet connection. It was an early internet connection because Japan had internet access way before we did. So it was basically the Nintendo servers, which incidentally, if you didn't know this, Nintendo only updated their servers in preparation for Splatoon 3 from the last iteration of updates they gave it, which was the GameCube era. So if you were playing Splatoon or Splatoon 2 or anything like that on the Switch, you were playing using the same Nintendo server infrastructure and Nintendo network infrastructure as you were if you were playing Phantasy Star Online on your GameCube. That's so many years span of time. That is so many. That is insane to me. So I wanted to show you, this is the mascot they built for the Famicom Disk System. This is our little guy. Isn't he adorable? Look at his eyes. He's just a little guy. He's just here to be a little guy. He's the best. I just want a plushie of him, and I want to carry him around. So I wanted to show you some of the games that existed because of that disk system, so you could really kind of, sink your teeth into how much the system really built for us. So first, we have Doki Doki Panic, which you might think looks a bit familiar, and that should, honestly, if you play NES games, that probably should look familiar, because this game got functionally reskinned into Mario 2. This was released as part of a big festival presentation thing. I'm not gonna give you that whole story right now. We'll do a Mario lore at some point. But basically, this game only made sense inside of the native Japanese market because the mascots you had as characters were exclusive to Japan. And it was a much more fun game than what they were going to release as Mario 2. Um, Long story short, so they just reskinned it through Mario and Luigi and Peach and I think Toad in there. At that point, she was Princess Toadstool, not Peach. But you had those 4 characters that you could play as, and that was Mario 2. But it started as a Famicom download. Also, Kid Icarus. If you've played any of the Kid Icarus games, any of them, they wouldn't exist without the Famicom Disk System, because that was the first time Nintendo was able to actually really build immersive open worlds. Again, remember, part of the reason Iwata even ended up successful at Nintendo was because the first project he spearheaded was the ability to include all 18 holes of golf on the original Golf cartridge, which is something they wanted to release early, and they did release early in the console's lifespan. So we're talking back to those early games I mentioned before, where you don't have the disk system memory, you don't have the better built system and cartridges. You've got the basicest thing Nintendo put out, and Iwata managed to make it happen. And that was, revolutionary. Nobody else could fit 18-hole holes onto the golf course. They couldn't figure it out for the life of them. He did. Without the disk system, we wouldn't have had the world expansion from 18 holes of golf packed neatly together to Kid Icarus, which, if you haven't played, the first Kid Icarus is a surprisingly expansive game. Also, if you're a fan of Bomberman, and if you've ever played that game series, I know we haven't had enough of them in the late few years, but, Bomberman's rad. Play more Bomberman. That started because of the disk system. I want to say that one was initially a download. Just a straight up download to the disk system. And that's what the first Bomberman looks like. So yeah. We also have, so in Japan, it's known as something Castle of Dracula, but if that cover looks familiar to you, that's Castlevania. We wouldn't have basically the Metroidvania genre if it weren't for the disk system, because that was the only way you could fit that much of a level built world into a cartridge. Speaking of Metroidvanias, the other side of that, the Metroid, is only extant because of the disk system. It was, again, I know I said this before, I know I'm repeating myself, but it was the first time game companies, especially Nintendo, were really able to build wildly expansive worlds. Even going back to the Atari, and the Atari was sort of a Wunderkammer of a machine as it was, even some of the more ridiculous games for that, like Tunnel Runner, one of my favorites, which is arguably the first FPS, even that is honestly a small space that it takes up logistically in the game cartridge. As far as the internal maps, it just keeps regenerating stuff to make it harder for you. It's awesome. You know what else only exists because of the disk system? You wouldn't have Zelda if you didn't have the disk system. So yes, Praxiquat, you are correct. We should thank the Famicom Disk System. Look at these gifts it gave us. And I wanted to show you, because you know, like I said, a lot of them were downloaded, but you could also just buy the hard copy disc as itself if you didn't want to make just a downloadable copy, right? So this is one of the released discs for the original Zelda. And you can see in it the original Nintendo disc. And if you look at it down at the bottom of it, you've got the Nintendo print logo right here in actually built into the cartridge. And they would all come in this little box, and you'd have a little bit of a hard case and sleeve for the disc itself. You'd have your game book, which is where a lot of the lore came from, because we didn't get nearly as much lore in America as they did in Japan. So if you ever wonder where a lot of the extended Zelda lore comes from in the early days, it's things like this. Look at the size of that. That is at least as thick as the disc. And that's mechanics and lore. So a lot of companies were making things for the Nintendo Disk System, which makes sense, right? Because that thing was revolutionary. Everybody wanted to jump in the pool. Square is everybody. Have you ever heard of dog? Like dog development or dog gaming? Ever seen this logo right here? The D D D O O O G G G. Yeah, have you ever seen that? If you have, you played a Square Nintendo game that almost bankrupted Squaresoft. So in the late 80s, early 90s, it was like super common for companies to like not fully conglomerate, but build special projects together with branching teams. And you'd have like 15 people from this company and 30 people from this company and 30 people from another company all working together under one name or umbrella. As you know, kind of a brain trust, kind of a goodwill, kind of a PR thing. It depended. It, you know, variables are variable. But this started in 1986. So around the time the NES was starting to pick up steam in America. Okay? It had been out for, I think, about 2 years from the initial release, about a year from the major public release. And you had 7 different companies. Most of them were PC game and like rogue and stealth and early nerdy ass like wizardry style games. That's what they built. And then you just have Square in there, which was primarily at this point a console gaming company. But you had 7 of them jump in the same trench coat and become DOG, or the Square Disc Original Group. They even took some of their old PC games that they had released and reformatted them under the DOG umbrella, under the DOG licensing, to be released as Nintendo discs. I don't know if you know this, but Final Fantasy, the first Final Fantasy, was intended to be Square's farewell as a business. It was their swan song. It was supposed to be their last and final game. It was also supposed to release on the disk system, but Nintendo, as ever, has been very greedy with their licensing and copyrights and payouts when it comes to these peripherals. So because of the way Nintendo copyright policies happened, yes, the mother games were made under one of the multi-company groups. You are correct, Fate Crate. I don't remember which one off the top of my head because I'm very much in the PowerPoint brain right now, but I could do a thing on that too. Absolutely. Yeah, Praxequat, that's why it's called Final Fantasy. It was, in fact, their Final Fantasy game. And it's funny because it ended up saving the company, right? Like literally the DOG branch nearly bankrupted the entirety of Squaresoft. I don't remember if HAL is Fate Crade. I don't remember if HAL is one of these like multi-company groups or if HAL is like Rareware, where it was like 7 nerds hanging out in a basement that accidentally got successful at shit and then hired a whole bunch of people to help them out and keep the spirit of the thing going. I need to re-research that because my nerd levels are not high enough at this moment. It is embarrassing. I am not at peak nerd at this moment. I have failed you. I am so sorry. I'll do my best going forward. But yeah, so Final Fantasy genuinely saved Squaresoft as a company. Not necessarily kept it from, you know, the later merger with Enix to become Squeenix, but it kept the company afloat for several more years. And it was supposed to be a disc game because there was so much to it. And Nintendo was like, okay, so I own this copyright and I own that copyright and I make this much money and you make little money and I make more money and you make nothing and I make dollars and you make pennies and blah ha 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 ha. And Square was like, bro, no. I don't like this plan. Can we go with plan B where I say fuck you and release this as a cartridge instead? So they did. um, hold on to that though, because I'll be very real. The reason I'm doing all of this backstory is to lead you in to the mindset and understanding of how we get to the Satellaview, right? Because ultimately, Nintendo is a victim of its own patterns of behavior. And that's something you're going to see here if you pay attention to my very interesting, boring slides. Um, there is a whole lot of a repeated motif. This might as well be a musical with 5 major themes. American musical theater, I am calling you out. But no. Nintendo keeps tripping over its own cloak. Because Nintendo gets greedy, Nintendo gets selfish, Nintendo doesn't like to share, and that ends up ruining Nintendo's day. So, welcome back from ads, everybody. So one thing you'll see through this PowerPoint, if you pay attention, is that the thing that always gets Nintendo and always ends all of these great ideas, at least in what we're covering today, is Nintendo's greed and inability to share with the companies that helped Nintendo get where it is. So, the disc system was not an option for Final Fantasy because Nintendo was going to own everything, and Square was like, bro, no. So we get a cartridge instead. Took a little bit longer to release. It wasn't quite what they had planned, but it was like 95, 98% there. You know, we take the wins where we can find them. So I wanted to show you some of the games that Dog was responsible for. And a lot of these aren't necessarily like big name Nintendo games, but they're things that show up in more people's collections than you would imagine, like 3D World Runner. And if you notice, up in the corner here, it says 3D glasses. This was a 3D NES game. Not quite the migraine machine of the Virtual Boy. I can't necessarily say I think it's the best 3D ever, but it is a novelty for sure. And it was one of the first home games outside of like specifically designated consoles that actually offered 3D. Also Mystery Quest, which like a lot of people ended up loving and kind of gained a lot of cult following later in its years. That was also a Dog game. You knew someone with the chromatic 3D glasses for NES? That's awesome. I actually have a pair of the wraparound 3D glasses for my Master System. And they kind of work still, which is really cool. They're not perfect. They're not amazing. But they're alive. And it looks like something the Terminator would wear when I put them on. But also, Dog gave us Deep Dungeon. Now, if you are a very particular type of turbo nerd, you might have heard of Deep Dungeon, because Deep Dungeon was the Japanese response to Wizardry. Did it use red blue anaglyphs for its 3D? Yes. Mostly. There's more to the technology there, but that was the basis for it. Yeah. But Deep Dungeon here, you can see it says Hummingbird Soft. Hummingbird was one of the companies that was involved in Dog Group. That's ATM machining right there. But yeah, one of the companies was like present in Dog. And this is basically the Japanese version of Wizardry, the computer game that was built for every type of fantasy nerd that ever wanted to play a role-playing game, like the role-playing game in the dawn of home computing. In Japan, it was released on the PC by Hummingbird Soft and then released on the disk system by Dog. So I mentioned the modem, right? Right. So I wanted to show you because I honestly think this is pretty cool. This Starship Enterprise looking thing up here. This is the Nintendo modem, and it would plug into the cartridge port, and you can see it's got a whole bunch of stuff going through it. This is the controller for your modem. Do you want to take a guess as to what year this was released? Again, modem for internet access. Do you want to take a wild guess, stab in the dark, as to when this particular peripheral was released? For the NES? Because you might be surprised. Also known as the Famicom Network System, by the way. This came out in 1988, guys. Praxaquat, you were close. You were very close. But it actually came out in 88. And it was a dial-up modem. And again, I have this in the PowerPoint, but I'm going to reiterate. Famicom is family computer. So this is your family computer network system. This was basically like buying one of the, like for most Americans in the 90s, buying an overpriced PC, like going to a Radio Shack or something, or a Gateway store or something like that, and buying like a PC that probably cost as much as your car, and getting it connected through the phone line, and bribing some techno wizard usually because people didn't know what they were doing. And Nintendo and Japan were just like, hey, bro, we can help you with some simple internet tasks. In 88, you could use this to trade stocks. You could check your weather forecast. You could bet on the horse races. You could access video game tips and cheats. It didn't have online games. Like, you couldn't play Nintendo games through the modem. But you could access panels, sometimes forums, sometimes just Nintendo newsletters that would give you tips and cheats to some of the hardest games Nintendo made. Trading stocks on your Nintendo console, what a world, right? Right? It's just think about that. Just think about how cool that is. How like crazy 80s futuristic that ends up being. So the Famicom modem did not last very long. It only lasted about 3 years. They discontinued service in 91 because not enough people glommed onto the service. Not enough people really made use of that. But the developer of it, Hiroshi Yamauchi, when they closed down that branch of Nintendo, he said something that, you know, kind of sticks with me even today, because this is 35 years ago. I can math. He was quoted as saying, "It's just a matter of time. When the people are ready for it, we have the network in place." And then we get up to Nintendo upgrading it for the GameCube and upgrading it for the Switch 2. Now, do you remember at the beginning of this PowerPoint I mentioned that they almost released a modem in America? There's a story there. Because this is definitely an almost. The year after the release of the modem in Japan, they started talks with AT&T in America about building a modem system. Now a number of factors came into play here, not the least of which being that it was so unsuccessful in Japan it lasted 3 years. But there was something else that killed the project in its cradle. The original idea for the Nintendo modem and how to sell it, and slight diversion here, but I have to give you context if you don't have it. Video game crash of 83, 6 years before this. It was no longer cool to have video games in your home. There was so much video game slop that everybody just decided video games were trash, and if you had video game consoles at home, you were a loser. Which is why NES cartridge cases looked like VHS cases. It's why GameCube cases look like DVD cases. Nintendo set the convention for video game case design in America as incognito, indecipherable from your regular entertainment media to help nerds stay stealth nerd and to still sell many products. So Keeping that in mind, they weren't going to be successful in America selling a modem to do nerd things on you know, on this, let's say, even if it was just $150 periphery. I say even, but you know, even if it was that, you're not going to sell people on that. So what they did was they partnered with the Minnesota State Lottery to build a prototype. And that was supposed to allow you to play like digital scratchers with like a limit of $50 a day. You could play the local like Powerball. You could also check the weather, basic things like that, right? But there was a news piece, like a local News at 11 piece released about it. Somewhere out there is a VHS copy of that news bit, that little like 2-3 minute news piece that I almost got my hands on a couple of years ago, and I would love to actually get my hands on it. I tried to find video of it for you guys, but it is hoarded tightly. Understandably, there was like a 2 or 3 minute news segment on this Nintendo modem and how it was going to allow you to do all these things, and you'd like go down to the post office or the DMV or whatever, show your license, you know, register yourself, your address, your landline number, or your modem number, blah 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 blah, right? And then you'd have like a daily budget of like $50 that you could play scratchers with, or you know, whatever. But it turns out internet-based gambling early on, and the idea of the public internet, was actually explicitly banned in Minnesota by like 85, I think. And a whole lot of people got uncomfy with the idea that, yeah, you set up the system, Pamela, you 37-year-old woman, but what about George, your 12-year-old shithead son? What's he gonna do? He's gonna wait for you to go to work one day, and then he's gonna decide that he wants to play the scratchers because they look like fun. So it died in the cradle. But a number of years later, Keith Rupp and Kevin Bushnell, Keith Rupp and Nolan Bushnell. And if Nolan Bushnell sounds familiar, it probably should. Nolan Bushnell is the man who gave us both Atari as a company and Chuck E. Cheese. That man has a storied history. But keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. We have Atari Chuck E. Cheese man and a collaborator working on a prototype for a modem that would have cross-platform compatibility between the NES, SNES, and Genesis models they had originally designed. Now, Bushnell stepped away from the project fairly early, but Keith Rupp kept it going, and Sega had its own thing. Sega Genesis ended up having like a cable connection, like a landline cable connection that you could download games through, which was pretty cool. There are some Mega Mans that were only released that way until like 2015 or something. But yeah, he'd expected like Tetris games, for example, to actually be online and multi-platform. Basically what we have today, but we're talking, I don't know, 92, 94, you know. I find it phenomenally cool, personally. I think it's one of the raddest things that came out of this Wild West timeline. Classic George. Yeah, right? George is always going to get into shit. That's what he do. I also wanted you guys to see up there, you know, I went off the slide, but you could get a moment to see some of the scratcher games that actually existed, because one of the prototype cartridges for the Minnesota State Lottery was found just a few years ago, and somebody took some screenshots for us, because let's preserve that lost media. So working our way up the timeline, we get to the Super Famicom, which is the Satellaview's home system. But I'd mentioned before, Super Famicom almost had a disc peripheral. We're talking early 90s, mid 90s. We're not talking a floppy disk anymore. We're talking a compact disc, or as the kids used to say, them CDs. I want you to look at this. I want you to take this in. I want you to absorb it into your system. because this is one of the surviving prototypes of the Nintendo and Sony PlayStation. If you look down at the front, you've got that black bar. That was a disc feeder. This is one of the earlier ones where it was. Anyway, this was a disc feeder. You see at the top that little plastic bit, the gray bit that looks like it could be a hat, the tiny rectangle. Comparatively, that was where your cartridge went. So this necessary detour is brought to you by historical context. As early as '88, so, you know, around the time of the modem, right? Sony began development with Nintendo for a CD component for their next system, the Super Famicom. 1988, they were working on a CD gaming component. They made, I think it was about 20 different prototypes, and a few of them still exist today. One of them sold for over $250,000 at auction just a few years ago. And I seriously considered how much I actually needed my kidneys. So they started this project in '88, but in June of 1991, Sony had a press conference where they announced the partnership. They announced that they were working with Nintendo on a brand new console that was going to be a CD and disc console. It was going to be this cool, super cool thing. Also, side note, I wish we still got the rainbow PlayStation logo. I think that is the coolest logo they've ever had. But that's me. That's your fish talking. Oh, thank you, Kawaii Cuties. I will in fact hydrate. Thank you. And I will do the stretch. Yes, ma'am. Anyway, Sony announced this. June 1991 was the push for CD compatibility due to larger storage or faster read-write times. So it depends. Okay. So the cartridges generally loaded faster. The cartridges were cheaper to produce. The discs could hold a whole lot more. Like the first couple Resident Evils, it's honestly almost miraculous that those were able to be ported to the N64, because people didn't expect that console to be able to hold that much information in that much space. Any of either the cartridges or anything like that. So part of it was that you had a potential to put more time and effort into graphics and world building and a wider world on the disc. Because you had so much more space to work with. But then also you had the availability of just a quick cartridge game, because cartridges didn't take that. I don't know if you've ever seen like an old PlayStation or PlayStation 2. You pop a disc in there and it takes a second. You hear that and it goes for, if you're lucky, 5 seconds. If you're not lucky, up to 30. And that's just the disc loading all of the information. So there's you know, pros and cons to each side, and some companies made better cartridge games, some made better disc games. Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad I was able to help. So back to Nintendo and Sony and the Nintendo PlayStation. Okay, I'm sorry. We just have to take a look at this console for a second, because just look, you've got a switch to tell it whether to go for the info from the disc or the cartridge. You have plugins for I think those are your different sound options. You've got a reset button and a power button. You've got so many options on this thing. It is built so pretty. I want it so bad. Apparently Sony was really proud of it, and they should have been. So they had this really cool press conference where they announced that they were doing this thing. And then the next day, Nintendo had a press conference where they announced that they were doing a thing with Philips. Nintendo, in one of the pettiest moves imaginable, decided that because Sony wouldn't forfeit licensing for the CD games and wanted to actually maintain some level of creative and technical control, they went a backdoor route and worked with Philips to make another console and waited for Sony to announce the Nintendo partnership to be like, actually, we choose this guy. Bye. Have you ever, we'll talk about that in a second. So Sony, in response, it was dirty. It was super dirty. It was awful. Sony, in response, spent a number of years redesigning and reformatting and removing all of, like, shaving off all of the Nintendo serial numbers from everything they had designed and making it their own. And building an exclusive developer network with some of the Nintendo developers and some of the Sega developers, and being like, don't you want to build for us? We're making discs. You could play disc games. And we're talking around 94-ish. So, like, the Sega Saturn was kind of coming out, but was $700, and oh my god, why? The Sega CD was also $300, and that was an add-on that you could plug into your Sega Genesis, the console what lived forever. Or you could spend like $200 and buy yourself a Sony PlayStation. and you know, the developers of games were like, we want to make these awesome games, we want to make these beautiful games, we want people to actually buy the damn system that the game goes to so we can make money. So PlayStation, you know, sweetheart deal to a lot of companies. That's honestly where at the core we got the move of Final Fantasy from cartridge Nintendo to Sony PlayStation, among other series. But I want you to look at something here, and I want you to appreciate this. I want you to look at this first generation release Sony PlayStation controller, because the dual sticks, the dual analog sticks that they introduced, those weren't on first release controllers. Those actually came later in the console's life. It might have only been like 6 months, but it was still later. And you can see how much they were just like legally distinct from the Super Nintendo. Oh, also just a little bit of trivia. The rainbow buttons, the blue, green, yellow, red, is what the Super Famicom had in Japan, as opposed to the American purple and purple. Dharma, the life was really strange before the invention of DualShock. Yeah, no kidding. I've gone back and tried to play like early Tomb Raider games with the D-pad, and it hurts us, precious. It hurts us. Also, hi Dharma, welcome in. You've probably been here a while, but good to see you. So yeah, that was how Sony, that was the amount of Sony built their own console, but just legally distinct enough from Nintendo, that we're talking about here. Next, I'm going to show you the console Nintendo actually made. I don't know if you know this console, but I feel like we should have some terrible, terrifying music happening behind the scenes as this pops up. This is one of 3 models of the Philips CDI. This is one of the more reliable models of the Philips CDI. This is the mistake. Forget the Atari Jaguar or Lynx, forget the Wonder Swan, forget the Virtual Boy. This thing is a nightmare. So in the aftermath of that split between Nintendo and Sony, Nintendo and Philips created the CDI, one of the most unsuccessful consoles ever made. Nintendo threw away a Sony partnership for this and created their own biggest rival for the next 20 years. Exactly. That was why I said before, pay attention, because so much of this story is Nintendo shooting itself in the foot through its own greed and selfishness. It's honestly incredible how many times a company that big can fuck up that hard and still succeed. So the Philips CDI averaged between $300 and $600 in the mid 90s, not in mid 90s, like not in comparable money, in actual mid 90s dollars. The Yakuza for you. um the Philips CDI was meant to be a home entertainment console. So there are like learning discs, there are kind of like coloring discs for kids, there's soundscapes, there's an internet explorer, there's a encyclopedia disc. It wasn't all just Nintendo that Philips was courting with this system. Um, it was meant to be a lot of things, and it was exactly none of them. Uh, Nintendo contracted 3 games or 6 games. I can words. Six games for this console. Um, and the console and the first 4 games were so bad that 2 of the games were canceled in release, like before even release, in production. Um, I want anybody who doesn't know to take a guess as to what these any of these 6 games might have been. If you're not familiar with the CDI, I would love to hear any guesses as to what they would use as flagship characters for this most excellent of disc consoles. I have seen 5 of these in my life. I have seen one that mostly worked. Just for the record. You've no idea? Okay. That's okay. I'm gonna learn you today. Um, but in response to the Philips CDI and the Nintendo partnership, Sony developed the Sony PlayStation, and then the PlayStation 2, and then the PlayStation 3, and then the PlayStation Portable, and then the PlayStation 4, and then the PlayStation Vita, and then the PlayStation 5, and the naming convention starts seeming a bit more directed and petty the longer you think about it, in my opinion. Considering the original prototype had been known throughout the majority of its development as the Nintendo PlayStation. The fact that to this day, in the year of our Lord 2026, Sony is still making it a point to just name it the PlayStation blank, like that is some prime mean girl energy right there. I don't care who you are. That is serving a level of petty I will never be able to accomplish. And like I mentioned before, there were a number of you respect it, yeah, for real, right? Like on a level, that's an ability to be that bitch that I wish I could be. But I mentioned before about, sometimes the mechanics of it, and sometimes Nintendo was just as bad to their game development companies as they were to their console development companies. So you had a lot of franchises that just moved over with the switch to disc. You had Final Fantasy, you had Castlevania, you had Dragon Quest, you had Street Fighter, you had a number of things that just went bye and left Nintendo in the dust. So I wanted to show you them CDI games. They did it among three games each for 2 franchises. And the first was Zelda. They released 3 Zelda games. They released this, Wand of Gamelon, this, Faces of Evil, and this, Zelda's Adventure. Now, you've probably seen memes from Wand of Gamelon and Faces of Evil, because the animation manages to be even worse than that of the Adventures of Zelda cartoon show. That is, in fact, where those come from. And the guy who asks you about rubies, and the, that... if you haven't played these games and you don't want to play these games, and trust me, you don't want to play these games, they are buggy, they are janky, they are screamably bad. I honestly recommend the Game Grumps videos on them because they did a great job playing through Wand of Gamelon and Faces of Evil, and you can almost feel a palpable exhaustion, a palpable fatigue from them trying to make it through these games. They're not good. There is no aspect of them that is good. And the bottom one, Zelda's Adventure, is from that really cool time in gaming where companies would like fully video capture actors as the characters and like superimpose or juxtapose those on their video game backgrounds for your cutscene. So that blonde and blue and white thing down in the bottom corner is Zelda. And in cutscenes you could see her face. And it's technically the first Legend of Zelda game where Zelda's the protagonist. But it's not worth that title. There was one more game released. Again, 6 games were made. 4 were released. 3 of them were Zelda. The 4th one was Hotel Mario. Hotel Mario somehow manages to be the worst game in the Nintendo contract with the Philips CDI. It's honestly impressive because the game will just soft lock you if you breathe too heavy. It's supposed to be one of those, like, you know, open the door, hide from the monster, catch the monster, grab the thing, almost like the first arcade Mario Bros. where you were on the panels and you had to watch out for the Koopas and sometimes you had to find a thing on the level. Like that level of simplistic with balls-ass terrible animation. And game physics that were completely broken, an engine that didn't work. I know we've played Big Rig Racing. I will not play this. Now the other 2 games that didn't get released were Mario games. You had Mario, it was like Mario Across America or something like that, and this is one of the surviving stills from one of the advertisements for that game. Yeah, Hotel Mario in particular is really unplayable. It is in fact worse than Big Rig Over the Road Racing, because you can at least rely on the truck in Big Rig Over the Road Racing to move. And the game to just not crash because, again, you breathed too hard. It's a nightmare. It is something that somebody would build in like their first 6 months of game design, having never touched a computer before and jumping straight into it. I have no other description for that game. Look up some gameplay if you want. Have something to hold to comfort you over how bad it is if you need to. It is nightmarishly bad. Again, I recommend watching the Game Grumps play of the 2 animated CDI Zelda games. I don't recommend looking up anything more than 5 minutes of Hotel Mario. It is terra bad. It is, oh my god, bad. But yeah, bottom left is Mario Across America or Mario Takes America, something like that, something extremely 90s titling. And this is one of the remaining stills from one of the promotional materials that was released. The other game was a Mario Around the World. And they literally mean around the world. One of the levels was a sphinx, and it was like you were half climbing a sphinx that was half in the background, and it was very confused as to how it wanted to be, because in a lot of ways it wanted, like, there's more about this game clearly, right? This game almost wanted to be like, again, classic Mario Bros. You see how they just kind of developed on a theme and they didn't try too hard in the Philips contract. But nifty backgrounds, Mario go places, hooray! Nintendo. If I have anything to say about it, will never live the Philips CDI down. And I have a Zelda tattoo. So, we've talked about everything that leads us up to the Satellaview, because some of these were great choices on Nintendo's part, and some of these were terrible choices on Nintendo's part. And usually, the terrible choices came from Nintendo making worse ideas out of greed. Making worse decisions out of greed. This time, they kind of learned. Oh, thank you, Oxen, for the head pat. I appreciate it. This time they kind of learned from their own mistakes. And this pretty boy in a corner is the actual component, the Satellaview. Isn't it pretty? Isn't it shiny? Isn't it gorgeous? You make the worst decisions when you're hungry. Good job, Oxen. So this released April 23rd, 1995, and it ran until June 2000. End of June 2000. They stopped service before July started. 5 years is a pretty decent time for a console peripheral to be in active use in the market, in my humble opinion. I don't even need to read this one. I just want you guys to soak in. Look at how much it added to the console. Revolutionary numbers right there. Rev-a-fucking-lutionary. Imagine how much that gives. Now for context, they added a second graphics chip into some of the later Super Nintendo cartridges, and that's why Super Mario RPG is that much more expansive and expressive of a game than any of the Mario games that came before it. This basically added that amount, 2-3 years before that game came out. This little bad boy, that the coin-operated Nintendo machine for hotels. No, that's a bit earlier, Oxen. So this Satellaview allowed you to download games, subscribe to magazines, again, soundscapes, motionscapes, oceanscapes, blah blah blah, from your satellite connection. Nintendo from space! Exactly, Praxiclot, you get it. This equipment was managed and developed by the world's first satellite radio company in Japan, known as St. Giga. Honestly, they've got their own cool story to them. World's first digital satellite radio company. Eat it, serious. This is what it looked like when in active use. And again, we're talking about the differences in a Nintendo and a Super Famicom, or a Super Nintendo and Super Famicom, right? So it's going to look a little different from our consoles. But that's the top piece, is the original console, with the cartridge in it and the Satellaview underneath. So yes. So yes. We're all nerds here. You're hanging around this long with me, you're obviously some type of nerd. Again, we've got a top view, we've got a front view, and then we've got the breakdown of the cartridge and the memory card. The Satellaview came with a 4-way AC adapter and AV selector, so you could directly connect it to your broadcast satellite tuner, which was available in Japan in 1995. You would have to keep the specific cartridge plugged into the console because it was part of the processing machine. It added its own RAM. It had save and broadcast data through the little memory cards you could plug in there. Whole 8 megs memory card. Again, if you've ever seen like a Super Game Boy for a Super Nintendo where you can plug your Game Boy cartridges into your Super Nintendo, it honestly looks a lot like that. It's pretty cool. There was a hub, like a home screen sort of map you could work from. Honestly, it reminds me of, I think it's Mario Kart 10, or not Mario Kart, Mario Party 10. Is it 8 or 10 with the top hat that talks a little bit, like actually talks? It reminds me of that map, or the Mario Party they released for the Switch, that world map. So you could use that to like purchase new items or things, or find out about tournaments that Nintendo was doing in person or over the satellite connection, or find out about Nintendo updates coming out, or any general announcements about your hardware or software or new games or whatever. Like, we're talking kind of the earliest first steps of what became Nintendo Directs. Also, tying back to something you said earlier, Fate Crade, the world map, the hub map for this cartridge for your Satellaview was actually based on one of the cities from Earthbound. So I think that's pretty cool personally. So my fellow nerds, I want you to actually see the breakdown of how this plugged into your everything. So you'd have your satellite dish, you'd have your tuner, you'd plug your tuner into that AV selector. That would give you a video and a digital voice data. We're going to talk about that in a second. Hold on to your pants. You'd plug a power. It would take so much power. Look at all the power. You have a power transfer bracket between the Satellaview and the Super Famicom, just to make sure that you had enough power going to each and every component here. And you'd have the digital feed and a power feed from the AV selector, which got its power from the AC adapter. It needed its own power source. Everything here is like nom 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 electricity, but also just I honestly think that's super cool. I think that's super fucking cool. And if you're ever wondering how did it actually connect, you can look on the bottom of your Super Nintendo. That's what this is right here. There's that little cap you can pull off, and that hosts the connector bit for the Satellaview. Even though we never got the Satellaview, the only difference, like materially, between your average Super Famicom and your average Super Nintendo is the shell. I swear to God, you have all the same insides just about between the two consoles. The way they did digital rights management and proprietary, like, international licensing, whatever, came down to the plastic shell on the outside. Oh, Oxen, thank you for the stream streak. I appreciate that, man. That is why I can play Japanese Super Nintendo and N64 games on my American consoles. Because you just switch out the back of the cartridge with an American cartridge and it fits right through the teeth and it reads. Everything's fine. You could reach and unlock an SNES with a pair of snips, it's true. You could also reach and unlock your games by just changing out the back panel, because nothing attaches to the back panel in most of your cartridges. It's all attached to the front panel. You don't even need to swap the backs, but if you ever want to, like, sell it and somebody wants something all, you know, original, that's why I change out the backs, because because admittedly my Super Nintendo or my N64 is the blue raspberry one, so I don't want to do any permanent modifications to that because it's its own little piece of history. But it's a lot easier to take the back off of, like, John Madden 97 and just pop that on, you know, Wonder Project J2 or whatever. But everybody's got their own style, and I respect that. This, by the way, is your hub map from the Satellaview. And you can see what I mean about it being Earthbound based or Mother 2 based. and in different buildings were your vectors to different aspects of it, whether it was the Nintendo announcement board or the tournament hub or, you know, what have you. The Nintendo satellite connection had its own mascots, a little girl and a little boy. Super cute, honestly. But yeah, is adorable, right? Very Earthbound coded. Yes, very Earthbound coded. So, talking about what actually happened this time, this is hilariously both Nintendo's worst and best decision in console peripherals, because St. Giga had been struggling financially since the year before the release of this thing. Like, the Satellaview only ended service because St. Giga went under in 2000. But again, 5 years running off of this thing, I think that's nothing to scoff at in early video game technologies. Although it was considered a commercial failure, it did have a peak player base of about 100,000, which isn't, again, it's nothing to scoff at. For 1995, 1997, you don't exactly have people playing the same game online and telling each other about it and hyping it up all the time, right? Even in Japan, not like, yeah, a lot more people had internet, but it was still a different mentality about that sort of thing. One thing that didn't help them financially was that if you bought the Satellaview system, you didn't have to pay a service fee. You didn't have to pay anything beyond like your satellite fee. You didn't have to pay for a lot of the game down, like 99% of the game downloads. There might be something extra here or there, right? But it was like 5 out of, I think, like 190. But yeah, just buying it was enough to use it forever. What ultimately happened, what ultimately changed things, right, was this again came out in 95. The first N64 came out within a year of this. You wonder how much St. Giga got from Nintendo for their services? I would love to see those numbers. Honestly, I would be so fascinated to see those. But the thing that ultimately killed the Satellaview was that the N64 came out within a year, and Nintendo switched a lot of its focus to that. Sega was still a major rival for Nintendo. This was the beginning of Sega's fall, because this was around the time that the Sega Saturn was released. But up until that point, Sega was known... Honestly, one of the big things Sega was known for was the tagline, "We do what Nintendo don't." Sega consoles generally had better sound. They generally had cleaner graphics. They generally had, like, Sega game philosophy was, if we find a bug, turn it into an Easter egg, which is why early Sonic games have so many quote-unquote Easter eggs. It was an actual competitor for Nintendo. And then PlayStation started building up. From 1991, released PlayStation 1 in 94. This came out in 95. Nintendo was trying to fight with Sony this entire time, trying to hold on to gaming development contracts, trying to do better than this disc system, which, for the record, audiophiles will still hunt down the first release of the PlayStation because it has one of the cleanest CD sounds on the market. You're looking at, like, comparable to some of the like $2,000 to $5,000 systems released in audio stores at the time at PlayStation. So Nintendo was fighting on all fronts, and this could not hold the majority of their attention the same way like the disk drive did, or the modem even got, you know, a decent amount of Nintendo effort. This couldn't. There was no way to put that much into it as they were spread so thin. Now I want to talk about some of these games. What happened? Cause I mentioned you could just download games, right? Over 110 titles released just for the Satellaview in less than 5 years. Some of them were, again, just like the disc system, they were just straight up exclusive downloads. Some of them were quote unquote high definition remakes of previous cartridge releases. Some of them were epilogues or prologues to games that had already come out on cartridge. Basically, prototypical DLC. You might have noticed that digital audio input or output rather from the satellite system through the console in the diagram. There were certain releases of games that had voice acting, and the majority of those comprised the games that only existed on a timer. You could only play them while Nintendo was broadcasting them over the satellite network, usually for like an hour to 2 hours. Like once a week you'd get a chapter of a game and you hope you beat it during that time. But it would be fully voice acted or have hi-fi sound, or, you know, just like crazy amounts of effort there. There were certain games that you could download to the system, to your little memory cards, right? Your little Game Boy looking memory cards that had an internal timer as to how long you could play them. Regardless of whether they were being broadcast, just to add a challenge to it. Just to give you that little extra push to get good, scrub. And although Nintendo discontinued service to the Satellaview before St. Giga went under, officially, St. Giga did manage although to no financial gain, they did manage to repurpose a lot of the software, the firmware of the Satellaview, and turned it into a program guide for the radio service. Just kind of like an old cable TV program guide where you'd go to the guide channel, you'd press the guide button on your grandma's remote, and you'd go to the guide channel and it would show you all the basics. St. Giga did that with the Satellaview. So some of the games that released, again, over 110, so I can't go over all of them with you, but I want to show you some of them. This may look a little funny. This should look funny, because this looks like it would be a still from the NES Legend of Zelda, right? That very first one, grabbing them pieces of the Triforce. But it don't look like no NES graphics. That's because one of the Zelda releases they did for the satellite system was functionally a 16-bit remake of the original Legend of Zelda. And it was released in chapters, and you had a timer to beat it, and you had the option to not just play as Link, but also play as the two mascots of the Satellaview in that bottom left picture. And in the bottom right picture, you can see how much time you would have left on your Zelda file, on your Zelda play for that particular download. There's also a really cool game called The Ancient Stone Tablets. You've probably never heard of it, and that makes sense because it was a Satellaview exclusive. Up until people started emulating it onto cartridges, because honestly, because 3D printing has revolutionized that market. But you can now get yourself the first sequel to Link to the Past and play it on your Super Nintendo if you want, or play it on an emulator online. But this was a Satellaview exclusive. Had voice acting. It's a Zelda from like 96. BS Zelda, yeah. BS is the name you're gonna see attached to a lot of these game franchises, because that's basically the Satellaview indicator. I can't remember what the B stands for at the moment because my brain is liquid and I apologize. But it is something like basic Satellaview or something like that. I can actually look it up real quick, so I don't give you false information. Let me do that. Let me be a responsible informant here. Broadcast satellite. There we go. Yeah, broadcast satellite. So you'll see a lot of these that say like BS Zelda or BS blah blah blah, BS Mario, and it makes sense because it's the broadcast satellite system. So, another one that was released primarily as an exclusive was a Fire Emblem game. What is it? The Arachnia, something like the Arachnia Wars? I can never remember. The first major game in that story saga for Fire Emblem that doesn't feature Marth is a Satellaview release. And here we've got the broadcast version and then the updated ROM version that you can get your hands on. But also, if you have a DS, which most later DSs are region unlocked, you can get this Fire Emblem game right here, and it actually has the first release of a Satellaview game on a later console, which happened to be this Fire Emblem game. There was also a remake of the first Dragon Quest for the Satellaview. And again, we just mentioned it. There you see the BS, and it's BS Dragon Quest. It's not bullshit, it's a broadcast satellite. This remake, got its own magazine ad, and I figured anybody who was a Dragon Quest fan would appreciate the slime, because they're slime and they're yes. So, so one of the things, well, a couple of things about this remake, um, the cutscenes had voice acting. Monsters would drop loot. Um, just it was Dragon Quest 1 and then some. You would find monsters more frequently, they would drop actual helpful loot. Uh Again, the voice acting, like it had some really unique things to it. And the music on the Super Nintendo. This is what came through. This is the literal soundtrack. I want you to hear it. Isn't that beautiful? They had a full symphonic orchestra do the music for the satellite release. It's hard to find, but you can find releases of the CD they did on the market, which is pretty cool. That it's still technically available, if difficult. But my god, isn't that just Super Nintendo? Compare it to, Link to the Past music, Donkey Kong music, and Donkey Kong music slaps. We had a number of games that never really saw much more in the light of day until emulation really happened. There was the BS F-Zero that introduced these four beautiful cars right here that you might recognize from the Switch F-Zero game that was released. There was also another F-Zero Grand Prix as a sequel to that one. Interesting bit of trivia for you. If you didn't know, Captain Falcon was initially intended to be the mascot character for the Super Famicom console. And his original color design was gray and pink. And then they decided that F-Zero needed a mascot more than the console did. But yeah, if you've played, say, Smash Bros, and you see the different Captain Falcons, and you see that gray and pink outfit, that was his original design. Harvest Moon got a special release for the satellites, the Satellaview system, where you really only stayed on your farm, but it had like kind of minimized Harvest Moon aspects to it. But if you just wanted to be a hermit and do farm things, you had the opportunity on your satellite system. There was also a Sim City. There was even a Sim City competition at one point. But finding information on that, like finding actual hard information, is difficult as hell nowadays, because a lot of these are functionally lost media. Also, if you've ever played, say, on PlayStation, RPG Maker or any of those games, RPG Maker was so wonderfully supported and well built up by the Satellaview. It's actually like insane. It's unbelievable. But yeah, RPG Maker had several updates and downloads, and we'll get into that a little bit. If you like Kirby, we talked about Kirby earlier. Kirby had a whole entire game, and a lot of these games, right, you wouldn't get the whole game at once in a broadcast. You'd get them in chapters. So you'd get like chapter 1 one week, and chapter 2 the week after, and chapter 3 the week after, right? So with some of these games, you'd get, say, the Kirby one, you'd get little mini games that came out week after week after week after week. And aside from being adorable as hell, which you can't tell me these aren't, this game is also basically a prequel to Kirby Superstar. And it's all just a bunch of adorable Kirby mini games. you've got baseball, you've got brick break, you've got pinball, you've got a sort of like ball drop. Like you got all sorts of different things going on, and these aren't the only games that came out off of that Kirby game, but these are the most important ones. I've spoken. There were also, I mentioned competitions and tournaments. Those didn't just stop with the NES. Those continued on to the Satellaview. This game got re-released, I think like I think it was on the Switch. This got a re-release recently, maybe 2022. It's a Sute Hakun. It's just a cute little like tournament style puzzler. It had its own tournament. There was a fishing game tournament, because of course there was. If you've ever seen Nintendo in fishing games, they're basically rabid for them in the old days. And then my personal favorite that I wanted to share with you was the Mario. So Mario Paint had its own Satellaview release. And not only did it have a Satellaview release, it also had a competition on the Satellaview for Best Picture Drawn in Mario Paint. And the Satellaview release was fascinating because it was the release of the game that didn't require people to use the mouse component. You could use a controller, and it made it a lot easier for some people. I'm some people. But there was a nationwide competition in Japan for the best drawing anybody could do in Mario Paint. And I wanted to show you guys that drawing. I think, like, I've spent like 10 minutes staring this thing down, trying to like just trying to just like really take in, find all the little pixels that make the sparkle happen, that give it the text. Like, it's, how do you get that good, man? That's some excellent level wizard magic. God damn. So, speaking of Mario, there were a number of Mario games that were released as Satellaview exclusives. BS Super Mario USA, you've got levels in different weather. It's, in some ways, it's kind of a reskin of previous Mario games, but in some ways, it's its own beast. But that was a Satellaview exclusive. There was also Wario's Woods. This one is a specific release that was just for the Satellaview, that featured a lot of comedians, like famous comedians of the time in the game instead of the Wario characters. There was also a sequel to Wario's Woods that was a Satellaview exclusive at the time. There was also a Yoshi remake of, I think it was Puyo Puyo Tetris, and you could play as different colored Yoshis and just be little guys making blocks go, being little Yoshi, and I love them, and they're Yoshi, and yes, and also this Satellaview exclusive. No, that's not Mario Kart. Take a look at it. That is a Mario character insert remake of Excitebike. That was a Satellaview exclusive. You can, a lot of these on this screen, you can find nowadays and emulate or download or you know, buy repro copies of if you really want to get a cartridge and get that good feel for it. Etsy's full of them. But Mario Kart but Excitebike. I don't have anything further to say on the topic. Mario Kart but Excitebike. Bro, we thought it was cool when Mario Kart Deluxe added in an Excitebike level. They did it years before, the other way around. They're just going back to their roots right there. Okay. So, like I said before, it wasn't just games. If you were, say, a Chrono Trigger fan, and you just wanted more Chrono Trigger ephemera, there were character and music libraries that you could access and download and save to a cartridge and learn all you wanted about any of them characters. If you wanted to know more about your good Robo Boy, oh gosh, I can't remember any of the names right now because I'm focused on other things in my brain, and the Rolodex ain't rolling. But you know, if you know Chrono Trigger, if you want to know more about Chrono Trigger, you'd have to go back in time and get a Satellaview and unlock the deep lore. Otherwise, find somebody who did that for you. There was a music maker for the Super Nintendo that was honestly pretty impressive. Not the Mario Paint music maker, which is impressive in its own right. But there was a music maker that you could just putz around on. Not the first time Nintendo did it. They released a keyboard and keyboard learning program for the NES, and we are talking a full 63 or 58 key keyboard. Like, it's not a full size, it's not like a concert size, but it is a learning size piano keyboard that plugs into your console and has a cartridge to go with it to teach you how to play the piano. It's nuts. This is Music Writing Game by Nintendo, and the downloads you could get from the Satellaview allowed you to convert your score into something maybe your printable computer could read, or somebody you knew who could actually do MIDI off of something like that could read. Like, it allowed for wider conversion of the music you wrote, and it gave you the option to write full scores. Ads in 1 minute, might be good to find a brief pause. Yeah, I was getting there. I see it, Wubba. Thank you. Another one that happened is Derby Stallion. I'm gonna explain a little bit about Derby Stallion right before the ads, because this is a Super Nintendo game where it's Uma Musume without the gotcha. If I'm being very real, no horse girls, no gotcha. Just you can breed horses, you can raise horses, you can race horses, you can build horse careers. A lot of the horses in this game were based on actual horses on the Japanese race circuit, if not directly taken from the Japanese race circuit. It's some pretty wild stuff. Like it's basically like the old like NHL or like NFL games. The Musume's your Uma. I mean, yeah, but it's like the old, sports ball games you could get where you could play your favorite linebacker or your favorite forward or your favorite shortstop and just do the thing and have a good old time. That game came out in 96. In 97, there was functionally DLC you could download that gave you information and stats on the horses of that year that were racing, and then there was another DLC that gave you like new breeding programs and further updates to data. Like, again, we're talking 1996, 1997. When was the first time one of the good sports ball games did that on like more modern consoles? Was that the PS3 360 era? When you could download updated information and stats for your favorite particular players? I don't know, man. I feel like I'm trying to remember anything that like really hit the market before then. Like really popularized in the market before then. Because Final Fantasy XI was one of the big breakpoints for American video game console markets to go online. Because Final Fantasy XI was the MMO, right? That was the big thing. It was an MMO you could play on your PlayStation. It was incredible for what it was. I still have a disc somewhere. But that was fairly late PS2 that you really had people jumping online with their consoles. Or by the same token, you had the, I mentioned it before, the Dreamcast, the GameCube had Phantasy Star Online. And you had the GameCube keyboard, the purple and gray keyboard that's the size of a toddler. Bulky and clunky and clicky and crazy, and all of that. Was that like 2001 to 2004? And instead we're talking 1996 and 1997. This is almost a decade ahead of Sony as far as that aspect goes, which like deserves its own level of respect, right? Like honestly, Nintendo was a mad scientist. Nintendo was I'm gonna say it again. Nintendo was Doc Brown from Back to the Future, just over there doing crazy science things because he thought he would make things better. And what harm's it gonna do? What does this button do? The science edition, right? Right? Nah, Nintendo was like, let me just make a deal with a satellite radio company, and we're gonna build more tech. We're gonna build us some more wicked wild tech because we're Nintendo and we do Nintendo things. So yeah, yeah, you wanted to play your horse game a little bit longer with all the horses and talents and skills you built up, but you wanted them new horses? Okay, Nintendo's got your back, bro. Like, what can you say to that? Realistically, what can you say to that? It's pretty great. It's genuinely pretty great, and I wish Nintendo held on to that. I have strong opinions. My name is Kawari Koi. I have strong opinions. My opinions are my own. You do not have to share them. But I appreciate you listening to them. Hi guys, welcome back. I just the long and short of what you just missed was me remarking on the fact that it took Sony until really the release of Final Fantasy XI to hit this same sort of marketable online community that Nintendo had built in the late 80s and still had with the DLC of Derby Stallion in 96 and 97. So yeah, again, RPG Maker 2 specifically, they had expansions for that I think it was like 5 or 6 specific expansions that you could download just for the RPG Maker. And they were so expansive and so particular that they basically were Sims expansions. I have no other way to describe them but like early Sims expansions. Uh Honestly bonkers stuff. And again, you're downloading this for free most of the time, 99% of the time. There's a Gundam game. Hi, my name's Kawari. I'm gonna mention the giant robots. There's a Gundam game called SD Gundam G Next. Um, the things you could download were, yeah, you had like a small handful of extra maps you could download to play on, but then you had 2 download exclusive Gundams. You could download the Sky Gundam, which is a cool looking Gundam, and the Devil Gundam, which is a hella cool looking Gundam. I do want. Please to give 12 times over so I can have a small collection and not worry about losing one. But then you also had like major published magazines where if you had a subscription and it was a subscription magazine, you would just download your copy. Some of them just released free Satellaview copies because they had licenses with Giga or Nintendo, and so you could get functionally the Japanese version of Home and Garden just on your Satellaview. Just download it. Yeah, robots. Me love some robots. I don't know what else to tell you, man. I love me some robots. And I mentioned before, Saint Giga, even though Nintendo stopped working with and on the console before Saint Giga fully went under, Saint Giga ended up using it as a program guide and a couple other like experimental attempts at function, just on their own. Just they were like, we built this thing, we should do more with this thing. This is my beloved. Look upon my screen, ye mortals, in despair that we never have Devil Gundam. I mean, please to give. I want him in my pocket and also in my garage. Thank you. Now I wanted to show you guys something to end this out. I want you to get to see the actual ad. But you're gonna have to give me just a second because I don't know if the captions are gonna be on, and you deserve captions, so we might have to restart this briefly.
これからは宇宙からゲームが降ってくるってわけだ。
その通り。このサテラビューをスーパーファミコンと合体させて BS 受信システムに接続すれば、タモリや内田有紀らがお送りする超面白ゲームプログラムが毎日無料で楽しめる。聞く、見る、遊ぶ、参加する。サテラビュー。
That's one of the original ads for the Satellaview. I wanted you to get to see that because there's something strangely adorable about that to me. Just number one, Mario's voice. I always expect it to be Charles Martinet because I am woefully American. Number two, the things in the way they advertise that is so pleasantly charming. It's like, if you look at 90s game ads in America, it's all explosions and everything's super cool, rad, like awesome. And then you've got Japan and they're just like, hey, we got this thing where you can play stuff for free. You can do all these things. Look at the puzzle, yay, puzzle. No explosions. And I say this as a fan of giant robots. It's just a wholesome little guy. And Mario in a spacesuit is when was the next time we actually saw that? Was that Galaxy or Odyssey that we saw Mario in a proper spacesuit again? But yeah. So that is the Satellaview. That is one of Nintendo's most interesting peripherals that they ever made, and one of the longest legacies of peripherals. Because the lost media proliferation, the lost media renaissance happened in the past decade or so, you have a lot of people who are like, oh, I've got this old Famicom Disk System disc. I wonder what's on. Oh my god, here's this early copy of blah 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 game nobody has seen since like 1987. Or with the Satellaview, you've got people who are finding their old 8 meg cartridges, their memory cards, and being like, oh, I wonder what's on. Oh my god, here's ancient stone tablets. I forgot I had this. Quick, let me convert it over. And a lot of these games are rediscovered media. And honestly, a lot of them are worth your time. Even if it's just like looking up a YouTube video for the novelty of it. Just if you've got a favorite franchise, just add BS at the beginning and then that franchise name, and see if there's a Nintendo game about it. I didn't cover all of them. There's over 100 of them. Over 110 just for this system. Like, it's incredible. It's beautiful. It's ridiculous. Yes, you're entirely right, Praxiquat. Bless the digital archivists. That is exactly what I agree with that entirely. Yes. Man, it's so cool. It's so cool. This was a year after Toy Story came out, and everybody was ranting and raving about the wonder of CGI media, right? CGI movies. Never mind that Reboot existed several years before Toy Story. And Nintendo's like, bro, satellite gaming. That was the sort of thing that, like, your rich friend had on their Xbox later on. Most people had on their 360 later on. Not in the 80s, not in the 90s, not to the level Nintendo just kind of like threw things at the wall and we're like, let's do it, we'll figure it out on the way. There's something uniquely special about the Satellaview in particular, but Nintendo's desire to reinvent its own wheel in the most chaotically scientific way possible through the 80s and 90s. Yeah, a full decade ahead of the curve. Again, Nintendo gave us the first online leaderboards, like nationwide online leaderboards for some of these games, which just, bro, what can you say to that? What is there to say about that, aside from just how crazy it is that Nintendo had nationwide online gaming leaderboards in the 80s? It's awesome. It's super awesome. Nintendo had DLC in the 90s. It was just there to have a good time and make everything cooler. And so yeah, that is that is this PowerPoint on my hyperfixation. I wanted to teach you guys about the Satellaview. I hope it was good for you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned things. I hope you were entertained. I know I was probably awkward about things, but that's just the Kawari Koi experience. But yeah. So, ta-da! So yeah, hi again. Hello, hi. Your own gaming experience started in the PS1 Game Boy Advance era, so it's been super neat to hear about the history leading up to that in the 80s and 90s. Dude, at some point, I really want to do like a gen by gen gaming breakdown, because there are some things that are so hilariously weird. They make sense for how the gaming industry happened at the time, but they also make no sense for how technology should work. And I'm not just talking about like the fact that every Pong console is just one of two consoles with a different plastic case put on it. I'm talking about things like the Channel F, or the Vectrex, or, you know, the different models of Intellivision and the compatibility between Atari and Intellivision, or ColecoVision, or the fact that Sega had a better 8-bit console than Nintendo. These are all just things that I could just go off for days about. I could give you a 5-hour PowerPoint on the history of game consoles because I am a turbo nerd. When I was working at the video game shop, I had a coworker / employee who one day we'd gotten everything done and it was quiet and there was nothing else to do and we had several hours left on the clock, and he just goes in the back and he pulls out an old Pong machine and he goes, "Okay, teach me about this." And so I just started unscrewing it as I'm talking and I show him the internals, and at that point I just started going and the probably autism kicked in hard. And 3 hours later, I taught this boy everything I knew about specific Pong consoles. I just went on a 3-hour lecture about the damn Pong console. So yeah, I'm a professional. I definitely want to do like a full like flow chart of major consoles at some point. And I want to do something on the 64 disk drive because that deserves its own video in my opinion. And maybe like the intensity of Sega in early console Sega. Because this is the stuff I know like super well, like absurdly well. I am early tech priest. I have nothing else to say about it. I am early tech priest. So yeah, at some point we'll do things on that. The N64 honestly would probably be just the video, and a decent part of it would be on the disk drive because the disk drive was Nintendo's attempted peripheral for that system. But yeah, so retro game history is my jam, and one of the things I know way too much about, because there's a couple of those, but retro game history. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed it today. I hope that was fun. You can only assume I've researched the phone freaking of the 80s and 90s. Yeah, I have, yeah. And not as much as some of this stuff, I'll admit, but that's mostly because I love the idea of tiny little box for your kids that's also like supercomputer functionally, or a bunch of duct tape and hope plastered together and you make the picture go. I'm a normal fish. I am a normal fish who does normal fish things, and yeah, a little hope does go a long way. You know, honestly, if you're gonna take anything away from this today at all to go research or on your own or look into on your own, if you want chaos, go look up the Game Grumps, Wand of Gamelon, and Faces of Evil playthrough. Always normal fish does normal things normally. You're entirely right, Fate Crate. I'm nothing but a normal fish. I lure you in with the light, and by the time you realize it's too dangerous, you can't leave. So yeah, if you're gonna take anything away from today, go look up your favorite game, like Nintendo game series with BS attached or Satellaview attached. See if there was a game released for that series, and see if it's been re-released, because some of them have. Praxicot, I love that. Go watch the Game Grumps Wand of Gamelon Faces of Evil playthrough, and just keep in mind that those are probably the best games made for the CDI, bar none, and enjoy yourself. Or, you know, look into Satoru Iwata, because dude was a tech wizard and managed to do things with duct tape, twine, and basic computer chips that nobody else could figure out. Like, genuinely, that man's first successful job at Nintendo was the golf cartridge. That is why, on his birthday, the year after he died, if you had a Switch and it was set to the right date and everything, and you lifted the controllers in Iwata's signature like hand movement from his Nintendo Directs, it would pull up golf. There is an Easter egg built into the original Switch console, where if you, I'm pretty sure it's his birthday, it might be the release day of the console, but it happened immediately the year after, like after release. If you go back and you reset your console, set it to that day, and you pick up the two Joy-Cons and you move them in the like upward hand motion that Iwata-san used to do, your system will pull up, I think it's technically flog because it's golf backwards, but it'll pull up the 8-bit golf that Iwata made. That is how like profoundly influential he was for Nintendo. And that's so cool, man. That's so cool, man. I like game history. The only other thing I would suggest, if you want to look into weird game things and none of that sparks joy, look at a Nolan Bushnell, because that man almost gave us a universal modem for 6th gen consoles, 5th and 6th gen consoles. That man is the reason Chuck E. Cheese exists, and that man is the reason Atari exists, which ultimately is the reason Apple exists. That's a whole story. But yeah, Nolan Bushnell gave us everything from, ultimately, Five Nights at Freddy's to your iPhone. So, yeah. He's an interesting legacy right there. But I don't necessarily have anything more to say unless anybody has any questions for me today. Anybody has anything I could or should clarify or expand upon or do things with or mold your brains into, or any of that, like let me know. Thank you. You've thoroughly enjoyed getting learned. I'm so glad, Praxiclot. I've tried to do a PowerPoint every month. You guys are getting 2 this month because I didn't do one last month. And I try to alternate between like something geeky and something like history nerdy, or science nerdy. So like I did a PowerPoint on the Edmund Fitzgerald. I did a PowerPoint on why ants are terrifying. I did this. I did another one in there. I'm trying to remember what the other one was. Oh, anime that disappointed me. So you know, if you have any PowerPoint recommendations, you can always put them in the Discord. And anybody who might want to join the Discord, there is a Discord. You can ask the chat to just give you, like the chat machine to just give you the Discord, and it will, and you can join and you can hang out and it'll be cool. No kawaii cuties, no exams, no exams, none of that. No, I'm just, if there's anything more I can answer or any questions you have, I want to make sure I do the thing. I want to be a helper. Yes, I want to make help go. So if you have any questions or there's anything that particularly interested you or anything like that or anything I wasn't clear on, I would love to be able to clarify. That's all. Just want to make sure I'm doing my best here. But yeah, if what future presentations would I be interested in making? So one that was suggested in the Discord was like game prequels and sequels that didn't have the same energy as what they were tied into. And I've been working on that. There was, let me take a look because I've actually got a list right here of what I'm working on. I've got that one. I've got one on what makes good fan fiction and what doesn't. I've got anime you should check out, and I'm sorry nobody told you. So the topics are wide reaching. At some point I'll do a presentation on the Demon Core and why it haunts me. But I have a different science history nerdy thing planned for later this month. Bugs are current hyperfixation, so I'll try to dig up the ant VOD if it's out there. Currently, because I haven't had the time to do any editing, and I am a one fish show around here, all of my VODs should be available on my YouTube if you want to go watch them. If there's anything you missed or something you missed, like because you weren't here for the whole thing, which like is understandable, you know, you can always hop over to my YouTube and watch things if you so choose. Yeah, the Demon Core genuinely haunts me to the point where I just gave up and made it an emote in my Discord. It's just a thing now. It's just there. I've just accepted it. I'm welcoming it with open arms and no screwdrivers. But yeah, bugs are a current hyperfixation. I will let you know I talk mad shit about ants, but it's all scientifically based mad shit. The way that like a lot of people are terrified of like spiders or mice or something like that, that is I will pick up a spider all day every day. I am terrified of ants. I think they are the freakiest fucking things on this planet. Cordyceps or no. It don't matter. They are the worst. TM. I think that's also where my group of nerds here started picking on me about the Ant Pope, which shows up sometimes. So yeah. My next PowerPoint is probably going to be a history one later this month. You think Twitch needs more science? You always support anyone trying to get that content out there. There are a couple. I'll tell you right now. There are a couple streamers and tubers that show up in my chat sometimes that you should absolutely check out. Who are good science nerds too. Next time one of them raids in, I will point them out and I will be like, you should check out this nerd stuff because this nerd does cool stuff. But yeah, I like sharing the things I know because I think knowledge is fun. So yeah, it's one of the ways this fish shows affection is sharing weird niche knowledge. So yeah, if you've got anything you want me to cover, if it's something I know about, I definitely will. If it's something I don't know about, I might just start researching it and I might fall down the rabbit hole and we'll see where it goes. You know, fun stuff. That being said, I don't have much else to talk about tonight. I think I'm still dealing with the weird sinus resonance thing that happened earlier. I work in a place that is simultaneously like an office and a workshop. And today was all metal grinding and clanking and fusing and welding and all these big loud noises, and I hit a level of sound in my head that literally resonated through and into my sinus cavities. It was a whole treat. So I might need to go like rest my whole face and do nice things for my body. Hey, White Tanuki, good to see you. I actually just finished my stream, but thank you for popping in. You guys are so sweet. So I'm gonna share our raid message here, because this is what we're going with. This is what we've had. It makes me laugh so much. It's okay, White Tanuki. You can always watch the VOD. It's really just me talking about video game console history and being a nerd for like 2 hours. It's okay. I'm glad you showed up at all. I'm going to get us rated over. Wubba, you said first flower. I like that name. I tend to trust your judgment when it comes to these things. It'll bother me later. No problem. I'm glad you love my streams. I'm glad you are here. I'm glad all of you are here. I appreciate you all hanging out. Thank you guys for hanging out, and I hope you enjoy. I genuinely hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was as good for you as it was for me. You guys are rad. I'm gonna get us popped over to First Flower here in a second. Idols of Ash. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. I will see you guys soon. I will see you Thursday. We're gonna do something different-ish this Thursday. We're gonna do some Stardew. I'm excited for that. I hope you have a good night or morning or whatever time of clock it is for you. And I'll see you Thursday. And you're super rad. And Otsukoi!